Hey guys, it's Fifth Lauren, also known as 944. Don't forget Thorin's YouTube channel.
A question I'm often asked in AMAs and interviews is, what were the greatest events, the most memorable events, my favourite events in CSGO? And two that I always cite is MLG X Games Aspen Invitational and MLG Columbus, which was actually a major. Now, MLG as an organisation, Major League Gaming, don't do big CSGO events anymore. There are political and economic reasons in terms of the market as to why they don't. But this is an organisation where, funnily enough, I wasn't a big fan of them before they came into CSGO. With their history in games like Call of Duty and Halo, those are not games I've ever followed. Those are very much American games to me. I was always involved in Quake and Counter-Strike, and then later League of Legends, Dota, StarCraft, etc. But I never veered over into what I saw as console games, but actually obviously had a PC background as well. And I personally saw as inferior versions of Counter-Strike. Then they had the StarCraft 2 period, where, again, I will be absolutely open. I thought there were some questionable decisions they made, or at the time, the context made them look a little bit dodgy. I mean, I heard behind the scenes these stories about in the early MLGs for StarCraft 2, that they were paying Boxer just untold amounts of money, more than first prize, just to attend the event. Now, obviously, later on emerged that there was some fuckery on the Korean side of the equation, where Boxer's manager would also demand outrageous amounts of money. So I can't necessarily, knowing what I know now, put all that on them. But this certainly sounded a bit dodgy, because at the time, especially, I was much more of a purist, and I didn't really give much quarter to people in terms of putting on a show. Having like the WWE element of like, we're going to have the people you want, and you're going to see them when you want to see them, and you're going to have the matchups you want. What the UFC actually does, where you straddle the line between pure entertainment of the WWE and sport, because obviously in the UFC, they will put on fights that, based on the logic of having to win fights to get to the top, they should never put on. Like, for example, when Nick Diaz fought George St. Pierre, it doesn't matter. Nick Diaz had lost his last fight. I don't think he actually did, but the record says he did. GSP hadn't lost a fight in a long time. It should have been someone else was the contender, but the UFC knew the big money fight, the one that George St. Pierre wants, is Nick Diaz, so let's put on the big money fight. And this has happened numerous times. Obviously, things like heavyweight are the ones where they typically boost people really quickly because they want to build up that big Tyson in the 80s/early 90s money fight that's going to get all the cash in the fucking bank before these fighters burn out or lose too many fights. So I didn't appreciate that, and therefore I didn't really understand, in fact saw it as a negative, that you'd fly this guy over, pay him megabucks, when he isn't the best Korean, he isn't the best player, he's probably not going to win most of these events. To me, that was kind of like you'd broken the integrity. But you know what, as time goes on, as I learn more about the business, I can even look past stuff like that. Now, extended series, funnily enough, as a competitive format purist, extended series technically is actually a good format. It's just that that's only technically. Like, in theory, if you point out the pros and cons and the way the tournament goes, I sort of get it, but I don't actually like the way it works out in practice. And I think it actually ends up feeling unfair and making for worse games if you put it out in practice. So again, that's another aspect that generally I thought made their events worse. I mean, famously, when Nada was with SK, when I was working at SK, I think Nada had to win some series like literally 4-0 or something to get past this extended series. Whereas if he'd played anyone else at that point, it would have been a normal best of 3 or something ridiculous. So there's then the fact that back in 2011, when they were running these tournaments, the prize money was pretty low. First place would be $5,000. That's sometimes beating out a whole bunch of Koreans, all the best Westerns. You get $5,000. I used to think, this is kind of whack, actually. What is this? Then they had the pay-per-view events, which personally I was fine with. I liked. They had some amazing events when they did the MLG arenas in New York. Problem is, if you think fans are bad now, they had no concept back then that someone putting on an extra event, but you having to pay for it, was entirely fair and actually quite a reasonable business proposition. People just complained back then, well, it should all be just free for everyone. It's just bullshit. You are violating my human rights, or whatever stupid, inane logic people tend to apply there. So even though that seemed part of the shittiness, it wasn't at all, actually. So generally, a lot of it probably just misunderstanding, not knowing stuff about the context. Because when they came into CSGO, the first big event they did was at the beginning of 2015. And if you know anything about 2015 in CSGO, that is the year that CSGO popped off like a motherfucker. 2013, we barely had any events. They were all like what now would be considered tier 3, but they were the tier 1 because they were the biggest at the time. They weren't big international events that were properly televised. They were international and they had the best teams there, but they weren't the same level of exposure, prize money. Then we got the major at the end of 2013. 2014, we started to do more events. We started to ramp up. We had a bunch of majors, 3 of them obviously. The game started to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then 2015, it hit a point where it began to peak. Every event was big. All the top teams were going to tons of events. That's where all the burnout first started to happen. But one of the first events of the year, after it was technically ESEA was between the major and this event, and also I think A Split Invitational was there, the one that Virtus Pro won. So there were some other events after the major, DreamHack Winter 2014. But the big event after that was MLG X Games Invitational Aspen. Now, first of all, what a cool concept, because what happened is they took a Counter-Strike event to Aspen, Colorado, where the X Games Winter Games was going on. And it was just in its own tent with all the PCs set up in a stage area and the booths, which obviously MLG always had, which is a massive plus. And while this was all going on, if you went outside the tent, you could literally see ski lifts taking people to the top of slopes, people doing fucking snowboard tricks, skiing places. It was the real X Games Winter Games, and you were there. So bearing in mind, esports has always struggled to be, we want to be accepted like traditional sports. Well, if you think about it, extreme sports aren't traditional sports, but they have their own niche and they're big and they have a lot of sponsorship dollars and people watch them on TV and people watch the big events. So I thought it was even a clever sort of pairing of cultures, because these are subcultures, in some senses countercultures, gamers versus normal people, as it were. And I know now people have tried to normalize the term gamer and just attack us all en masse for massive cross-section of people who play games. But actually, gamer was a subculture for a long time, and Counter-Strike was part of why it was. These were one of the hardcore games people like me invested our life into well before we could make over minimum wage for the amount of work that we were doing in them. So I thought it was a classic pairing. For me, the better pairing and route to go for esports and games like CSGO is like extreme sports, poker, and UFC, so MMA. I think those are sports that play to their audience very well. They only show certain elements to the traditional media audience. They don't try to water down the whole product. They have their own clever way of showing it that's different. So I think there's all these factors there. So first of all, great concept. Everyone who went there was raving about it. It was brilliant. You also, if you were talent or a team, you went and you didn't just stay in a hotel. You stayed in a little, you stayed in a house basically in Aspen. It was baller as fuck. You had your own room, you had the area, you had a pool outside that was heated. It was actually an amazing trip and overall experience for the Counter-Strike. And obviously, some of the best Counter-Strike we've ever seen. Despite the fact it actually had a very simplistic format. It was just group stages that were GSL with best of ones into 4 teams making it to the playoffs. Semi-finals were best of 3. Final was best of 3. They even used a randomizer for the... I believe, off the top of my head, I think they used a randomizer for the final, because I know that they got Cobblestone pre-rework as the final map, and quite frankly, I don't think either team really liked that, and I know Nip complained like motherfuckers, because famously, Makalele had actually never played a game of Cobblestone on LAN before, and that was his first one, and they lost it, and LDLC won back-to-back big events over an IP. So... after that, which by the way was a tournament that featured my favourite series of all time, the semi-final between NIP and Fnatic, epic 3-game series. Obviously, this is a good feeling. They'd hired the right talent. They even went with different talent choices because they went with Sadikist and DDK as the casters. And on the desk, they got me and Fifth Lauren, and I was actually the desk host and an analyst. So it was a tight, small crew. I'm trying to think who else was there as well, because there was someone else there. Maybe Sean Gares casted a game or something. I'm forgetting someone. Oh, Steele was there as the observer. Obviously, this is just before he got banned, sadly. So actually, it was a very small talent crew, but it was a very good talent crew. And it was a talent crew that could really work with the people that we had and make an amazing event. And so the games were great. The talent crew was great. The venue was great. What a great start to their CSGO experience. Then they took over management of the CEVO Professional Offline Finals. So I think it was season 7 and season 8. I remember I went and did both of them. These actually had a much more advanced format. So they had GSL groups with best of 3 series in every match, leading into a best of 5 final. Now, part of the reason for this is because people like Adam Apicella at the top of MLG were listening when people like me said, let's have best of 3s for all the matches. Let's try best of 5s for finals. This is in the very early days of having best of 5s and having best of 3s in all the group stage games. So for me, one of the best formats you can have. I wish Majors had this format, and he was applying it back then because he listened to suggestions. This is a guy who was always open, and MLG generally open to trying new things, trying it a better way, because that's how you set yourself apart from your competition. You don't just do what they do, but worse or the same. You take a different path that can potentially be better, and you beat them to the punch, as it were. You get to the finish line before them with your shortcut. So this was a great part of what I loved about MLG, because they would listen to format things, not just from me, from people who are generally in the community, players, people on Reddit, people on websites and Twitter. They really were open to listening. I mean, I'll give you a very quick example. When they ran MLG Columbus, they already knew that it was a problem to have 4 best of 3s in a day. But they also knew it's also kind of shit to have 3 best of 3s when you have the quarterfinals of a major, and then have to take 1 quarterfinal and play that the next day with the 2 semifinals, because whoever is the winner of that quarterfinal, if they lose the semifinal, is going to complain, this is unfair, I had unfair treatment compared to everyone else, I had to play twice in one day, and I'm the only team that had to play 2 best of 3s in one day. And they'd be absolutely right. That is absolutely correct. And you saw, it wasn't for a few years, but when we got the SK Gaming lineups, they complained about this very fact, that they had to play the 2 best of 3s in one day. I think it was E-League, Boston, Atlanta, where they obviously lost the semi, and then later on it was E-League Major Boston, where they also lost the semi, and so understandably they complained because they had unfair circumstances compared to everyone else. I agree with them. But what is the solution? You can't just have 2 quarterfinals on one day and then 2 on the next, because then you have to have an extra day, which back then cost a lot of money to have extra running time. And then a team has a day off. So does that affect them? Would you rather be the team playing the day before? So instead, I actually suggested we try and figure out a way to have the semi-final and the quarters play on the same day for all the teams. And so what I suggested, which actually Adam took and expanded out further, was his idea was, right, get the 4 quarterfinals, so quarterfinal 1, 2, 3, 4. Get quarterfinal 1 and 2, which is going to lead into a semi-final. Play those 2 best of 3s on one day, and then just have the semi-final before the other quarterfinals. Because it doesn't matter. The final is going to be someone from the bottom side of the bracket anyway. But these 2 teams have just played. Have them play again, so they play 2 best of 3s on one day. We're not losing a day from the format. And they just go, and afterwards they play their semi-final, and we find out who the finalists. Then, the day afterwards, you play 3 and 4, and they play their semi-final, and then a day after that, so everyone gets like a little bit of time off, but there's a day off for the people in the first one. Then you have the grand final. Now, I thought this was at least worth trying. You'd never really know again how it would work out unless you tried it in practice, unless you actually saw what the results were. And if the team that always got to play a day before was winning the major, you'd know there might be an issue. If the team that played with a day off was winning the major by studying people, maybe that'd be an issue. But I thought it was a bold move. It was daring to even actually suggest this, to try it. Sadly, for whatever reasons, Valve didn't want to go ahead with that, didn't want to give them a chance to try it. But I know from all the other games they've done, like Dota, etc., they've been willing to experiment with formats, especially in pursuit of a format that's both entertaining, removes unfairness, and actually produces a very strong tournament format that will produce the winner. Then, after the CVOP seasons, we had 7 and 8. There was ones that were won by Virtus Pro in both instances over Na'Vi in the first season. And then this is the one where Neo was AWPing and he was the MVP. And then in the next season, season 8, was the one that they won over Mouse Sports in the final. Actually, it was shocking that Mouse Sports made it there, because you had teams like Na'Vi in attendance, you had Luminosity, you had Titan. But instead, it was this team that made it all the way there. And Nico was playing for them and they were going ham, but this is when they still had God B. So after that, next year, we had the major, didn't we? They got the major, MLG Columbus. What a sick tournament. Some of the best games of all time, one of the best venues. The location was amazing. It was held in the Nationwide Arena, which is where the Columbus Blue Jackets play in the NHL. And it had a totally sick setup. It was a lot of security. You felt like you were at a big time event compared to some of the other CS events I'd been to, like the DreamHack Winters, which were more like the gamer vibe of like there's a big LAN party and here's a big stage setup. It was a different vibe until it felt more professional, like traditional sports. And I thought it was a flawlessly run tournament, an amazing crowd, great games, fantastic storylines, fabulous talent lineup. Again, they always were willing to shell out for the talent lineup, and this is one of those majors where they got as many of the talent as they could. I always loved that they actually tried to get people like Scoots and Richard and me there. They understood that banter is part of it, that being entertainers is part of it. It's not just about having some of the big former players. Like some of the other events at the time were trying to go heavily with ex-pros, thinking that that will just placate fans. They didn't understand the show element of it because we hadn't built that up as much with the banter, because this is 2015 when it really popped off. Also, in terms of PR, public relations, I think that MLG is the best I have ever seen in the history of esports. As far as I'm concerned, they revolutionized CSGO PR, because before them, if there was a problem with an ESL or a DreamHack, okay, DreamHack would send out someone you knew from the community, someone who'd been involved, journalist, whatever. They'd say something, oh, you know, yeah, there was these problems, like, here's what we're going to do to fix it. They generally just try to explain it. ESL, for whatever reason, industry leaders, oftentimes would make the mistake of trying to explain what happened and the reason why, but in doing so, either directly or indirectly imply that it wasn't really their fault. Like they couldn't have done anything about it. And they didn't tend to really apologize. They just explained what happened and then you were supposed to just understand it. And so unfortunately, that used to piss people off actually. And in fact, ESL famously tried to lock horns a little bit with MLG over the MLG Columbus one and whether or not the venue was actually as full as they said it was. And there was a little bit of back and forth. And famously, that Reddit thread went really bad for ESL, where all the ESL employees were talking like this. And actually, credit to ESL. They learned their lesson. They took their hat off. They said, you know what, let's learn from these guys. And ESL has been a lot better since. Now, it hasn't always helped them. Like in Dota 2, it fucked them over with the Facebook thing, engaging with the community. But in CSGO, it helped a lot, actually. I think you've seen them turn around their reputation. They have really improved a lot. And I now think they have some pretty solid PR generally, and that they do a good job of apologizing and explaining and giving reasons, but not sounding like it's like, fuck you for being mad at us. So I think you have to thank MLG generally for starting that trend. I have to say, someone like FaceIt hasn't learned from that, quite frankly. Even though they have beloved community members like James Badoff who could come out and do it, if they did it the right way, they have to rely on lower level staff members. When higher level people talk, they do it in something of a dismissive and hostile and a confrontational manner. Even if someone's being confrontational with you, it's not a good look for a tournament organizer, I'm afraid. You have to kind of take it a bit, take it on the chin, and then just like respond in a professional manner. It's just the nature of the business. I'm not telling you whether to do it or not, but I'm telling you, people won't like it. People do not respond well to feeling like they're one of the customers you might be speaking down to. So not everyone's figured it out, but ESL did eventually. MLG were there as frontrunners, and part of it is Adam Apicel. One of the guys at the top was the guy taking himself to Reddit during events, listening to people, listening to their comments, doing threads, asking for feedback, applying things, and then apologizing if there were mistakes and explaining what he would do to fix them. So I think they were way ahead of the game on that, and I'm so thankful that they came into CSGO and did that. Then you've got to add in terms of banter and entertainment, which has obviously always been a heavy emphasis within my style as analysis, and Richard and Scoots, they got it. They came from the Call of Duty world. They came from North American esports where there's shit talking and there's fun and there's narratives and you're building up the excitement and then you're hitting the key points, but you're also calling people out when they underperform. They got it. In fact, to the extent that, you know what, there was a period in time, never would actually happen probably, where I was even thinking to myself, will Call of Duty ever get big enough in terms of viewership that they could actually pay me like anywhere close to my day rate? Because you know what, maybe I could get into that game. Maybe I could do the odd event. Because you know what, I feel like that'd be a world in which, first of all, I'd have a lot of fun. I'd have a contrast against some of the guys they've got there. But also, we could have some fun. They could go head to head with me. Some of them can banter. Some of them can have some fun. I think it would be a great matchup. Obviously, COD isn't my game. I'm not an expert at all there. But the idea of just going in as an entertainer, provocateur, kind of trickster figure, I think that would have been fun. And that's the kind of thing I think they were into. They got that aspect of esports. That's why they were good at putting on a show. Now, understandably, they can't really do events anymore. At least they haven't in a couple of years now. Partly because of Activision Blizzard, that merger, where what happened is, around MLG Columbus, just before, funnily enough, Blizzard bought Activision or whatever way around it was. Then you were in a situation where there was direct competition from both sides. Like, even if MLG, who themselves did want to try to run events, I know Adam actually tried to book out a big venue and get a CSGO major, but he couldn't get another one. Even though they might have wanted to do it, first of all, does everyone at the top of Activision Blizzard, both parties want to do it? Also, then when you go on the other side of the equation, where they're direct competitors with Valve Software now, because Blizzard's doing games like Overwatch, obviously StarCraft 2, then Activision's doing Call of Duty. Does Valve want to compete with a game that's similar in Call of Duty, or a game that's a big league as well in Overwatch? Do they want that person running a tournament in theirs, and especially a major? Seems questionable, right? If I had to guess, I'd say it's on the Valve side of the equation more than the other, that they can't get the big event, they can't get a major, which is a shame because I know from talking to Adam and hearing what he said publicly, he would have created a big spectacle like MLG Columbus or better. This is a guy who had a very shrewd sense of stadium dynamics. He's been in big venues, but he's been in small venues, and they've been on the grassroots circuit that they often were in Middle America, building it up, and then going to the big events and having the big events and having the small studio events and testing what that's like in the MLG studio or the New York offices versus having a studio event. And they had a very good sense of what events to put on in big venues, how to get the right venue at the right time. Is their market, the USA, whereas, you know, some of these other companies, ESL, DreamHack, they're coming from over in Europe and trying to make what they do, their formula blueprint, work in North America. So you think of some of the failures we've had, like I think in the past IEM Oakland had some kind of whack crowds, not for CSGO as much, but for things like League of Legends. Then obviously you had DreamHack Vegas, which was a fabulous venue, amazing concept for the tournament, great tournament, but sadly didn't have the crowd. They didn't figure out exactly the sweet spot of when to hold it, how to market it to get that crowd to come. I think MLG was ahead of the game on that and would have shown us something special, made some big and truly epic events. So they're not involved in CSGO anymore. Maybe they never will be because of political and economic market-based reasons. I personally miss them though. I thought they were great for what they did. I thought they did a great job and killed it at all different levels of tournament they ran, and I wish we could have more from them, including majors. This video was kindly supported by Gardner Wilson, Dean Tanglis, Alex Adams, Eddie Wingfors, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, godawfulwasteofspace, Kyla Harris, Travis Greb, James Harding, Daniel Yordanov, VeXii, Robert Baxter, and a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest to appear in my content? Do you want to ask me a question in my monthly AMA? Do you want teasers for upcoming content and guests? Want to take part in a discussion about esports with me? Put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today. Link in the description box.